Grandpa didn't drink coffee. I'm speaking about Dad's dad, William Howard Clinton, back when Ike and Mamie were in the White House. You can Google them later. Back when Ike and Mamie were in the White House, our family would head north once a month or so. It was a short hop up Route 8, Pittsburgh to Bakerstown, Pennsylvania. Dinner was on the table, Sunday dinner there in the white frame house where Dad was born. Fried rabbit was the entree. Grandma's thumbprints could be seen around the edge of the pie crust. Grandpa made a big deal about sitting next to Debbie, my little sister. They were both lefties, and that way nobody got elbow thumped. My fondest, my most vivid memories of Grandma and Grandpa come from later years when they lived in Ohio. Now, William Howard Clinton ever and always was a farmer at heart. He loved growing a large, lush garden. He and Grandma kept a little livestock there in Bakerstown, too. Honeybees, chickens, rabbits. Every now and then they'd get in a pig or a young sheep or a beef. These all destined for the dinner table, for the business end of a fork. Even though growing things was their passion, Grandma and Grandpa made ends meet relying on the paycheck, the paycheck that Grandpa brought home every Friday from the Peoples Natural Gas Company. Well, in 1955, Grandpa retired from the Peoples, and a few years later, he and Grandma bought a chunk of land from Uncle Bud and Aunt Naomi. By 1961, the preparations were all in place, and they left Bakerstown. They left for their retirement paradise in Columbiana County, Ohio. The new place lay along By Road, Route 432. It sat at the crest of a precipitous 1-mile grade coming up out of Negley, population about 400. All the rural infrastructure was in place. A well was drilled and a septic dug. The driveway was cut and a trailer pulled on so Grandma and Grandpa would have a roof over their heads. A garage provided some storage and workspace and a roof over Grandpa's Farmall Cub tractor. Now, right across the drive from the trailer was the centerpiece of the whole place, the inevitable great big organic garden. Beyond that, there was a little orchard and then several acres of fenced pasture. A skinny peninsula of barbed wire ran down the hill from the pasture to a spot in the woods. A spring there was piped into an old bathtub. Now, it was my custom as a teenager to spend a week with Grandma and Grandpa every summer. I'd go with Grandpa in the afternoon on his garden tour. He carried on these occasions an old coffee can with so much kerosene in the bottom, this to enforce his zero-tolerance policy for Japanese beetles on the bean plants or hornworms in his tomatoes. After dinner, if the Pirates were playing at home, Grandpa and I would head out to the driveway. We'd share the front bench seat of his green Ford Falcon. The radio signal didn't carry into the trailer, so we'd tune the car radio to 10:20 a.m. KDKA. Bob Prince would call the game for us from Forbes Field. Before we went to bed, Grandpa and I would start breakfast. He'd get his old coffee grinder and fetch a jar of hard wheat berries from the kitchen. We'd run some wheat through that old grinder and leave it to soak overnight. First thing in the morning, he and I would boil that up and enjoy it as a delicious hot breakfast cereal topped with organic honey. Then Grandma would bring the rest of my health food breakfast over to the table. 3 farm-fresh scrambled eggs just swimming in butter. 2 or 3 slices of liberally buttered toast, too. Nutty 9. She made the toast from a special bread called Nutty 9. Grandpa carried this home from the Rogers sale, wrapped in butcher paper, tied with twine. Now, I was no farm boy, but rather kind of a bookish Boy Scout from Pittsburgh. I can't claim to have been a lot of help around the place. All the same, I remember a couple of the things that I did there with Grandpa. One of those was mowing. They had an old wheel-driven, tow-behind sickle bar mower. That made it a 2-man job, and when I was in town, I was Grandpa's second man. I'd sit behind him on that old contraption, and I'd operate the lever that raised and lowered the sickle bar arm. It was my responsibility if we came to some obstruction in the field, a rock or a stump, to raise that bar and then lower it again on the far side to resume mowing. Now, one summer, by the time I got to their place, the vegetable garden was suffering. The weather had been incessantly hot and dry. Charles Dudley Warner famously remarked, "Everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it." Mr. Warner never met my grandpa. Grandpa began his quest to do something about the weather by inventorying his resources. He had his trusty Farmall Cub tractor, He had a clean 30-gallon metal barrel. Grandpa had a little wooden platform that sort of cantilevered over the drawbar of the tractor and hung out in back to hold a little cargo. And Grandpa had me, a willing, if somewhat bumbling, teenage grandson. Now, all these things, together with Leslie Run, the free-flowing creek at the bottom of the hill, looked for all the world to William Howard Clinton like God's provision for thirsty tomatoes. So he went into action. He put that little platform on the back of the tractor and he set the barrel on it where it hung out. He had me hop up beside the barrel and he gave me my directions. Hang on, Fred. Grandpa knew to keep it simple with me. And down that hill we went. Pulling up alongside the creek bank, he had me ferry buckets of water up to him, and these he poured through a funnel until the barrel was perhaps 2/3 filled. Now it was time to head back up By Road. Grandpa stationed me again beside the barrel, same directions. Hang on, Fred. He pointed the nose of that little tractor up the hill. Coming to the steepest part of the grade, he downshifted out of road gear, and when Grandpa popped the clutch, the front wheels of that little farmall began to ascend toward heaven, and the barrel and I in the back began to teeter in the opposite direction. Cool under pressure he was. He pushed in the clutch, the wheels came down. He hollered at me to run up and jump on beside him, leaving that precious water back there to fend for itself. We made it up the hill that day, water and everything. The vegetables got a little drink, but Grandma, she vetoed the return trip. Teenage grandsons can be oblivious to many things. I certainly was. Perhaps the thing I paid the least attention to was the rapid passage of the years. 1969 came along, and in the spring I graduated from high school. That was a busy summer. I was working. College was looming in the fall. I never spent another summer week in Negley, Ohio. It was just a couple years later we got the sad news that Grandma's health was failing. She descended into dementia. Just about Christmas Day, 1971, we gathered to lay Margaret Conley Clinton to rest. Grandpa, meanwhile, had some cardiac issues that were developing. He had a pacemaker implanted, but even with that, these issues led to the occasional blackout, which led to a for sale sign on the green Ford Falcon. Grandpa reluctantly realized that it was time to turn the page and leave his beloved retirement acres in Negley. He went at first right back to that white frame house on the Culmerville Road in Bakerstown, the one I remembered from the 50s. But eventually, Grandpa ended up in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. My Uncle Gene and Aunt Dot, and my cousins Mark and Jeff and Tim and Cassie had a place there called Etna Springs on the banks of the Slippery Rock Creek. Etna Springs had a standalone apartment. It was perfect for Grandpa. Well, it was perfect once Uncle Gene found somebody to till up a little ground for a garden. And now the groundhogs in Slippery Rock learned the fear of Grandpa's single-shot break-action 20-gauge. And that apartment turned out to be the last stop on the road to eternity for William Howard Clinton. The grandsons who had once wrangled runaway calves from his pasture now shouldered his casket. A few weeks later, Dad and his brothers and sisters gathered to clean out that apartment and to put Grandpa's affairs in order. And that evening, Dad came through the door. He put that old coffee grinder in my hands. It has been mine now for 45 years. 45 and maybe a couple more. Most of the time it just sits on display, a precious reminder of the blessings that God has granted me. Now, if you come to our place for breakfast, I might forget to offer you a cup of coffee. Like Grandpa, I don't drink coffee. But I will not forget this. If I know ahead of time that you're coming, the evening before, I'll take that coffee grinder down off the fireplace shelf and I'll fetch a jar of hard wheat berries from the kitchen. When you get there in the morning, the wheat will be soaking in a pot on the kitchen island. I'll put it on to boil and rummage around, find my very best honey. And you and I, we can sit down and swap a couple stories, share the taste of a sweet, sweet memory.